At the end of the journey, I turned to my wife and I was like, I think our season of suffering is over. And it really felt like that was the ending point of the majority of our suffering. And then 2 months later, it was when she had the journey that cured her of depression, from where she would say, she's cured. I was never into these type things in college. I've only been into it for less than 2 years. It has given us our life back. It's one of the most beautiful things in the world when done safely and properly.
Welcome to another episode of Negotiate Your Best Life. I love when I get to bring on my favorite people and introduce them to you. Actually, I think I've had you on before, but I am so excited about today's show because I get to introduce you to a topic that I've been actually saving for Mike Zeller, who any of you who have done my slave program, you know Mike Zeller because he's part of my slave program where he was the NLP expert, but he's also an expert in psychedelics. And this topic is so near and dear to my heart because it has helped so many people that I know. And Mike Zeller is near and dear to my heart because he's a dear, dear friend. And he's a genius. He helps high performers. He helps entrepreneurs. He helps people all over the world in helping them bring out their zone of genius and helping them heal through all sorts of modalities. And most recently through the world of psychedelics. So we're going to be talking about that today. And I am so glad to have you here. So welcome, Mike Zeller.
Rebecca, thanks for having me, friend. And you give such a great warm welcome and just honored to be here and just a joy to connect with you as always.
Thank you. We've been talking about doing this particular episode for a long time, and I'm so glad to finally be doing this because really it is really near and dear to your heart because first of all, you love lifting and supporting people, but you also have a personal passion about this particular topic. And if you could share your whole journey with how you ended up getting here.
Yeah. So my wife, as we discussed a little bit before, she is the daughter of a narcissistic mom and a narcissistic stepdad. So there was a little bit of childhood abuse, as you could imagine, and childhood trauma. And so mostly emotional, mental, spiritual, then, no sexual or anything like that, and some physical for sure. But, when we got pregnant in October 2020, it just triggered a lot of childhood trauma. She was actually in a pretty good space up until then, but the childhood trauma, and she was one of 11 kids, the oldest of 11 kids. And just, she was like, 8 years old, making dinner for the kids while having a baby in her arm, and her mom and stepdad, or the person she thought was her dad at the time, are fighting and like threatening each other like crazy. So like that was her normal life, just very heightened stress. And she's also a HSP, a highly sensitive person, which is another designation. So very sensitive, very creative, but easily overwhelmed. And so she was living in a perpetual state of overwhelm for 20 something years. Well, unfortunately, when our daughter was on the way, it started bringing back flashbacks, so PTSD, complex PTSD, which is technically incurable according to APA. And then it really came on strong when Sonnet was born, our daughter. And, our daughter would cry and would send her she'd cry for 30 seconds and it would literally send my wife into a depression spiral. I'd almost like, as I started becoming aware of this, I would be like, babe, get out of the house, get out of the house. Like as Sonnet was starting to cry, if I was holding her, it was like, she's just going to spiral. And then now I'd have my wife in a depression cloud for, hours, sometimes days. And I didn't know what was happening, frankly. I was into peak performance. I didn't understand trauma. I didn't understand PTSD at the time. And so in a way, I also started getting PTSD from this whole experience. And I was looking for solutions as I started becoming aware, because we tried a bunch of things. We tried neurofeedback, somatic psychotherapy. One of the big things that did help was NAD, which is a commonly used. It's a cellular fuel. Basically, your body uses it for 500 cellular processes, but you can supplement with it, or it's NAD IV clinics are popular. And we noticed a huge lift in her mental energy and her mental health when she was taking NAD. And because like PTSD and depression like depletes your energy big time. And but then it wasn't the end all cure all, because when our daughter would cry significantly, it would send her back in another depression spiral. And I was like, and I finally realized this is PTSD. And I was like, what can actually cure, not just numb PTSD? And that's what led me to psychedelics, because big pharma doesn't have a solution for that. They can numb you where you're a zombie, but not make you well at the end of the day for this, at least.
Mm. I mean, I can't even imagine, because you didn't have any children before, right? I
No,
mean, so you didn't have any experience with taking care of babies.
no, I did not. I quickly learned, and I love my daughter so much. So that part was not the hard part. It was really helping my wife get mentally well, because during the midst of the battle, I was like, there was many, many moments where I was like, my wife did not want to be here. So, I was like, I don't know if she's going to make it. And my daughter would grow up with her mom. Like that was a real legitimate fear that my wife and I both had, that she would not be able to like live to, see the next month. Because she was such state of overwhelm and trauma.
Oh, I mean, and you were trying to run a business at the time.
Yeah, and that was that. I mean, I had many clients that were gracious with it, but it was still, I just did not know what type of chaos I was actually really in. And then about a year and a half into this, I was like, I got to figure out, like, I got to make getting my wife well, number one, and my business secondary, because if I don't do that, I mean, my daughter's gonna grow up without her mom, because she did not want to be here, meaning be here on Earth. And I was like, my business isn't working very well anyhow. When my wife would literally, I'd be on a coaching call, and my wife would hit overwhelm and hand me my baby daughter and bolt out the house, and I'd have to coach with an infant in my lap for an hour and a half, because she would just get overwhelmed, and her PTSD was kicking in, and her nervous system was just shutting down. So it was the darkest window of my soul for sure that season. But I didn't give up, and she didn't give up either, fortunately. So
I mean, were there times that she did attempt to?
she didn't. And my wife had attempted suicide three times before the age of 21, but she never attempted it. She did write a suicide note one day, and I came home from an all day session, and she had a suicide note ready, that she never showed to me, but she had it. Yeah.
Mm, oh my gosh, I can't imagine the despair
Yeah.
from both of you.
Yeah, it was rough. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, so the depths of despair that narcissists can bring people to. I mean, for both the victims themselves and the people
Hmm.
around them, the people who love them.
Yeah.
And so I want to thank you and acknowledge you for being so willing to um, be vulnerable and share. And obviously you're sharing all of this with your wife's
Yeah.
permission.
Correct. Yeah.
And I
She's
just want to
she's
make sure that I'm saying that out loud for everybody who's
yeah,
listening.
yeah, for sure. We both made a decision that at least the majority of what we went through, we would be good with sharing to help others if we could figure out a way on the other side. And she courageously, I just had an article come out last month in Biohacker magazine of how psychedelics saved our marriage and gave us our life back. So it's a huge part of our journey, and she feels completely free now. So like it's like she's the happiest she's ever been in her life, and totally free energetically of a lot of this. So it feels really, really good. But
Yeah.
it sucked for a season. It really, really sucked. But yeah,
Yeah.
but but I
And
know. Go ahead, my bad.
oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, we knew, and I had the sense and hope in my irrational optimism of like, all right, yeah, we're going deep. It's kind of like a skyscraper. You go deep to go up tall, and we're going to go deep in this. But if we can figure our way out, we'll have one of the most powerful. I'll understand how to help heal trauma and PTSD in a way that few people in the world understand. And I feel like we've gotten there, and I've seen it happen not just with my wife, but with many other clients now that I work with, and it feels so good,
Mm,
to take people that are really stuck in
mm,
a deep way, or marriages or whatever, that we can recalibrate in a beautiful way in a single session, oftentimes. So,
mm. And I do want to just add in a disclaimer for this episode that, for anybody who listens to this episode is not meant to be any sort of substitute for
mhm,
um, psychological advice or medical advice
mhm,
or anything like that. And don't do anything without consulting a psychologist or mental health therapist or
mhm.
your doctor. So we are not,
Yeah,
we are not,
legally liable. It's not
yeah.
our responsibility.
So certainly consult your physician or your psychologist or mental health therapist before doing
Hmm.
anything.
Hmm.
Um, but for you
Hmm.
and your family, you decided to seek out something that, and by the way, this is not necessarily legal in
Correct.
every place. So we do want to mention that as well.
Yeah.
Um, so uh, you have to check the laws in your particular
Mhm.
state or country. So depending on where you live, you have to also look at that as
Yeah.
well. So for you, um, what was the what did you decide then to take a look at?
Yeah. So at first I started researching it. I was like, I had heard about it. I'd never done it actually. I'm was never a druggie or anything. And I just considered those drugs, illicit drugs or whatever. Well, then heard Tim Ferriss talk about it on one of his podcasts, and then Andrew Huberman on Huberman Labs, and they're very thoughtful, methodical. And then I started listening to Third Wave podcast, and I listened to about 150 podcasts, read about a dozen books to date on the space, and I already had a pretty deep understanding of human psychology, but I was getting into trauma, and I was studying PTSD, but also like what actually could work. And there's other things that can be very helpful. Neurofeedback can be helpful for some cases. EMDR can be very helpful. But for more complex scenarios, basically what happens is there's a thing called the critical period reopening. And this is from a friend of mine, psychedelic neuroscientist, Dr. Manish Gurn. He works with Robin Carr Harris, who's been on Huberman Labs, Tim Ferriss, et cetera. So I went deep into the science as well. And you basically have, and this is a research paper that came out in 2023, you have a critical period reopening, which is basically where your neuroplasticity surges. So it's almost like your brain and your nervous system gets a factory reset opportunity. Now, that's like laying the groundwork. If you don't do anything with that, this is where the trained practitioner, whether it's a psychedelic guide, a therapist, a coach, or a ceremonial experience, where you are guided through in a safe way to face those traumas, face those fears. Because also, what happens is almost like when you're on these substances, your nervous system, or your almost like, think of you got your higher self and then you got your protector parts. Your protector parts are like standing at the gate, not allowing access to your subconscious, not allowing access to that overwhelming experience from childhood where you were bullied, or you were this or that, or your mom said this or whatever, something else horrific happened. Because what is trauma? Trauma is your nervous system getting overwhelmed, and then it gets stuck. It like gets stuck in your body, and you just can't move through until you can safely face it. Well, the substances, MDMA, primarily speaking of MDMA, psilocybin, those are the two I've had the most experience with. They essentially double, and ketamine's legally available in most states within ketamine clinics, but basically they double your neuroplasticity. So then your protector part can relax. And so if a guide like myself or someone else, so I don't supply the medicine, so that protects me legally, okay? Because there's no law saying you can't sit with someone while they're going through a journey. So that's my legal protection, thankfully. But your protector part relaxes, which allows me, if I understand what's happening, to go back in, safely heal that traumatic moment, or integrate it in terms of internal family systems or parts therapy from NLP. If I integrate that, then that stuck energy is now moved through me and on the other side. And literally, I will have clients, like I have a CEO client, I'm working with him and his wife tomorrow. And it's almost like a bag of bricks, the weight that they came in with, that have been, maybe I've had clients that dealt with something for 20 years. It's basically gone. And we saw it with my wife. One, when she finally did a full dose, and the full dose for psilocybin was about 2.5 grams, according to Johns Hopkins clinical research, when they do therapeutic sessions with a therapist, a psychedelic trained guide, that night is when she felt like she got cured of depression, and about 85-90% cured of her complex PTSD, which is also technically incurable. And it was a night and day difference. Literally the next day and the months, I didn't believe it at first, but the next few months, and now over a year later, still, she has not returned back to before that session. She is free. And I see that with myself and other clients too. So it's really powerful when safely and ethically used. So that's it's you got to treat them with respect, though, the substances with respect. So anyway, that was a long story. I don't know where I should stop.
Well, I think that is pretty powerful. And I know that a lot of other people have had the same kind of experiences as well. What about something that's over the counter, like Kana or something like that? Can they have the same sort of effect?
Yeah, Kana is a great one. I take that frequently. My wife takes that frequently. It helps your amygdala self-regulate over a period of months. It's very gentle, so it's not going to hit you very hard, at least in the doses that we most readily can get from Amazon or whatever website. So it's helpful. It's not going to be as powerful as a MDMA, sassafras, psilocybin, just because it's not nearly as strong. But I would highly recommend it. Yeah, as a daily dose.
Mm. And what about like somatic breath work?
Yeah, that is phenomenal, especially when used. Actually, when used in combination, whether with microdosing, for example, a lot of people microdose with psilocybin, and it just helps you access those other parts of your dimension. So breath work, studies have shown that breath work and meditation can increase your neuroplasticity and rewire your brain, but it usually takes like 6 months. The research shows that it takes like 6 months. Well, for me, and when my wife's situation, she wasn't going to do breath work for 6 months on a daily basis. We need something that would get her unstuck. It was almost like, I look at some of these solutions as like, there's velvet hammers and then there's a freaking jackhammer. Sometimes you need the jackhammer. But 100% breath work is a phenomenal activity to actually help your nervous system release and heal and repattern. So yeah.
So for people who say, okay, I don't want to try something like a psychedelic or something like that. That kind of scares me. What's another way that they could start to rewire their nervous system right away?
Yeah, the two best tools, if this, and this is if you're dealing with, I'd say really the three best tools. If you're dealing with something that's more significant, neurofeedback is really good. It's just a gradual process, but
So
it's
what is neurofeedback? Explain.
neurofeedback. So they're literally, when you go into a neurofeedback center, they literally will hook up your head with all these like lobes. I mean, not lobes, but they wires coming out. You'll wear like almost a head mask, and they're going to measure your mental lobes. Like when we measured my wife's, she had 20 out of 21 mental lobes were fixed instead of flexible. Fixed is not what you want. You want flexible, which means you can adapt with life and things going wrong. Well, after she had done 5 sessions, about half of her mental lobes had gotten flexible, which allowed her to handle the stresses of life more effectively, and be less triggered. The other one, EMDR, is really good. You can find an EMDR therapist, and it's basically repatterning your reactions. I'm not as familiar with that, but I know it works on PTSD. Bessel van der Kolk in his Body Keeps the Score talks about it as well. He's also a fan of psychedelics for a lot of treatments as well. But the other thing I would look at is some substances like MDMA is not even really technically a psychedelic. It actually, you don't go off in the galaxy like an ayahuasca or psilocybin. You just feel more present in your body. And that's why it's also going to be the first one that's going to be passed or decriminalized in the US this year, because it's very safe feeling. You get flooded with love and empathy. That's why it's a miracle drug or a miracle substance for helping in couples therapy. Because I had another client, she flew in, we did a session, and all of her resentment and frustration, not just towards her husband, but towards life in general and some other business scenarios and all that, was gone, just gone. Like 2 weeks later, still totally gone. And she had been carrying some of that for years. So, but then also breath work and meditation retreats could do a similar thing of resetting your nervous system. The only thing that I would add is if you go back into triggering environments, you're probably going to be reactivated because it's almost like that wiring is still very much there. You just repattern yourself for a little bit. That's a challenge with most of life, right?
So, do you think that these types of psychedelics or these types of things could work to help a narcissist?
Yeah, I think they could. I would say MDMA would be more effective in general. But again, you got to, from what I've read so far on the narcissist side is, and you feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, it's a lot of inner child work that needs to be done, right? There's a mama wound or just like not feeling loved, and so they have to perform or whatever for that love. So if they are on the substance, then the protector part can relax, and a therapist that is a specialist in inner child work could then potentially guide that person into healing that wound, which then he or she could face reality differently because literally, we're both fans of Dispenza, right? One of the cool things about this work is memories are encoded according to feelings. Well, if I can go back in and access a trauma where there's a lot of pain and a lot of suffering and a lot of overwhelm, and then change the feeling of that memory, I have literally changed the memory, which it means I've changed the present moment and changed the future.
Yeah.
That energy is now gone.
Yeah.
And that memory is very different. And literally I see it in clients where another client of mine, she's flying up, her and her husband are flying up in April. She had a lot of birth trauma. She almost died giving birth. 15 years ago. Her body has been in this state of tension since then. And what's going to happen for her is when the medicine kicks in, I'm going to be able to access that moment safely. And her nervous system is going to relax. I can feel it. I can see it right now. Her nervous system is going to relax. And she's going to release the pain of nearly dying and the scaredness that she had. Now, I'm not going to say one treatment is going to do it for her, because that's a pretty severe scenario that she had. But her nervous system is going to have the capacity to partially reset. Because she's been living in her, literally, you've touched her shoulders and it's like you're touching a linebacker. She's a little 5'2" Asian lady. And I'm like, she's been in pain. Her tension, it got stuck. That overwhelm got stuck in her body. That's basically what PTSD is. I just don't know of any other substance or any other pathway that would allow me to get so deep so fast in this scenario. Now, she's spent tens of thousands of dollars and done so much other work. But this has the greatest potential, I think, to get her free.
What's the downside of these medicines?
For the most part, there's very little downside. Now, if there are conditions that it's very much not safe for, like schizophrenia or recent bipolar episodes, or psychotic episodes, you don't want to be taking some of these. And if you're HIV positive and you're taking liver protective diseases, you don't want to be taking MDMA by any means. But psilocybin, for example, it's about as safe as aspirin in terms of your nervous system and your brain. There's a Big Think YouTube video by Dr. Matthew Johnson and John Hopkins where he breaks down the safety and efficacy. Guess what the most unsafe substance is that is legally available? Alcohol. Alcohol, then you go down marijuana, then you go down all these different prescription meds. Below that, MDMA and psilocybin. Now, again, you don't want to be driving a car on magic mushrooms or MDMA. Like, you got to be cognizant. So like, you're not, you got to use it wisely. But the safety is actually really, really high. And my wife is very safety concerned. So like, we had to do all that research, and I had to test and experience the substances first before she would feel comfortable trying them herself. And even then she was pretty scared. But once she experienced it, she was like, wow, this is magical, is in essence what I know you've had friends that have done experiences and stuff. So it's, the safety this is, again, when used wisely with people that know what the heck they're doing and that create a safe container. The safe container is the biggest thing.
You definitely have to have the right guides. You definitely have to have the right people who know what they're doing. And what about the potential crash after?
The most common potential crash that people are a little concerned of is MDMA, and it's called the serotonin cliff, right? Well, mainly if you take certain supplements afterwards and before, you're not going to have it. It's since the first time I experienced the medicine, I had a little bit of brain fog and kind of that serotonin cliff the next 3 days probably. But since I have optimized my supplement use, I feel exactly the same the next day. I feel great. And you see it consistently. You can eradicate or reduce that cliff almost entirely. Not in every case, but pretty much where it's super minimal. Now, heavy users, if you've used MDMA, there is a risk for partiers when they've used it recreational and used it so much, then your brain, it does create sometimes a permanent serotonin deficit. So you got to be super, like, I use the medicines therapeutically to heal, not party. And there's a number of times you should only do a substance like that maybe once a month, if that, in general.
How would somebody go about finding a practitioner um, in their area, or
Yeah. It, there's a lot of practitioners popping up. There's underground specialists, of course, but there's not an organized, just like even therapy, there's not a whole lot of organized networks. There's a few, like Third Wave has some practitioners on that list. And a lot of local cities do have MAPS certified practitioners. MAPS is the nonprofit organization that is the big advocate for legalizing these medicines for healing trauma. And it's actually the Veterans Administration is a huge advocate for this because of the 22 veterans a day commit suicide. And so without the veterans pushing for this, we wouldn't have it as close to being legalized in the US as we are. And you think of like how many veterans from Vietnam War would have been positively affected and healed by these medicines if they weren't, stunted and scared away in the 1970s. But MAPS is probably a good source, or once you start getting connected to different sources, you can find practitioners underground or above ground. It just depends on what city location you are in. And you can do ketamine-assisted therapy. There's more ketamine-assisted therapists popping up. It's still pretty limited because it's a very new thing. It's only, I think the MAPS training first round was last year. So there's not a whole lot of certified specialists in the world currently.
What other questions should I have asked that I haven't asked?
Well, I think one thing with these medicines is do your research and see if you're called to it. Look at Netflix series How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. He does a great breakdown of the different substances. There's also a lot of potential for addiction. So alcoholic and opioid addiction, these substances like mescaline and ibogaine are really and even ayahuasca can be very effective for curing addiction. And the treatment might last a week instead of a month at a rehab center. Like my wife's dad is an alcoholic and he's in rehab right now, conventional rehab. And I was telling him, I was like, you're back in rehab. You haven't addressed the trauma, right? So, and these substances help heal the trauma. It's almost like, especially the native psilocybin or ayahuasca, it's almost like it knows where you need to go. And I've literally had very different journeys on the same exact dose, the same exact medicine. And it's like I needed something different at that time. And so that's one thing. Also, never do not work with someone who has never sat with that particular medicine, meaning used that medicine, gone on plenty of journeys where they know what to expect. That's one of the biggest things that when you go through trainings on this, they teach you is like, look for people that are really comfortable and experienced with this particular medicine, meaning they've used it themselves, they know what's happening, because each medicine has its own personality and profile and experience and arc of experience. So, because you don't have bad trips if you are properly guided. You might have trips that are a little bit harder or journeys that are a little bit harder. Like I had a journey where I saw a wave of grief come through. My dad grew up in World War II Germany, and I had this wave of suffering come through from him. And at the end of the journey, I turned to my wife and I was like, I think our season of suffering is over. And it really felt like that was the ending point of the majority of our suffering. And then 2 months later, it was when she had the journey that cured her of depression from, where she would say, she's cured. So I think those are some of the things. And then just do your research. MDMA is a very different substance than psilocybin, and it has different purposes. So make sure your guide, whoever's going to guide you, really knows the difference as well. But don't be scared of them. I was never into these type things in college or anything. I've only been into it for less than 2 years, and it has given us our life back. It's one of the most beautiful things in the world when done safely and properly. So that's my 2 cents, I guess, on that.
Mm, wonderful. So where can people learn more about you? And I think you have maybe a free handout or something for
Yeah.
people. So
Yeah. You can go to neurorewiring.com, and I've got 14 tools to rewire your nervous system and neuro rewire, basically whatever you need to rewire. And it goes through the most effective tools and strategies for that. Also, you can find me on mikezeller.com, or mike@mikezeller.com is my email. But also all the social media profiles, the Mike Zeller is all my social media handles. I do have some YouTube videos on the subject, and more coming out that are recorded already. So my YouTube channel is a big focus of this next year, to educate leaders and people that are suffering, because we were in a really dark season for 2.5 years, and it feels great to be on the other side, and I want to help as many people get on the other side now.
yeah. So go check him out. Go get his 14 tools to rewire your nervous system for peak performance, and just go see what it's all about. And I encourage you to just do research on it if you're interested. And as I said, we're not saying that we're telling you to go do it. I'm saying that it's just something that you may want to explore, but please do your research and ask questions before you go jump into anything.
Yeah.
And it was something that worked for Mike and his family. And so we're just giving you information, giving you knowledge. So thank you so much, Mike, for being here. Really, really appreciate you. I adore you, as you know. So
Thank you. Adore you too. You rock.
thank
Thanks for
you.
having me.
Thank you.